Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up, the podcast for marketers working in early and late stage startups. We're back. Welcome, everybody, to Fired Up. My name is Morgan McLintic, and today I am joined by the wonderful Nicole Pytel. Hey, Nicole.
Hey, Morgan. Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Yes, exciting topic today because we're going to be talking about how B2B buyer behavior is changing. So we pulled together a whole bunch of statistics. We're going to share some details about what we're seeing with the clients as well, and really sort of dive deep on why it's changing, because that has implications on how we market to these B2B buyers. And, just setting the scene, AI is clearly a massive way that is changing people's behavior. Just think of the way that you buy things and you research. G2 here says that AI isn't just influencing, is actually reshaping entirely how B2B buyers discover, evaluate, and commit to different vendors. Let's talk about AI. Let's talk about the economy, economic pressure. This one has been there for a while, but budgets are tighter and there's more scrutiny than ever, more focus on ROI. Buyers are also becoming a bit more self-reliant. That's a Forrester statistic from this year. There's a bunch of other changes in terms of brand trust, etc. Let's take you on a little journey today through the changes in B2B buying. And you probably got your own experiences here, but let's swap it with the data and see how you go. Ready, Nicole?
I'm ready. Let's do this.
Let's do it. Let's start with AI because, of course, every discussion has to start with AI. And, another G2 stat here, 79% of B2B buyers say AI-powered search has changed how they research solutions. And 29% now start with an LLM like ChatGPT. I think that last one's an AI Tech Park stat. So we know that buyers, the very beginning of their research is starting in ChatGPT. What does that mean for our marketing friends out there?
Yeah. So for our marketing friends, I think that those numbers are for B2B buyers as a whole. My guess is in the tech world, they're probably higher than that just because of what we do. I think first, though, is that SEO is not dead. People are still using Google. That's a question we get a lot. Like, are people still using Google, or are they all going to ChatGPT? They're still using Google. They're just increasingly starting with ChatGPT. I don't think this is any great surprise. I think the point is it's a bit of the Wild West right now, I think is the best way that I can describe what's happening in AI, because we all know it's the 800-pound pink gorilla in the room, but there's not a lot of visibility into really like what are you getting out of it. You can't see, for example, like impressions that you're getting in the LLMs like you would in Google search engine rankings, that kind of thing. There's just a lot of blind spots and everybody's trying to figure out, well, like, I don't know if it's working. Anecdotally, I hear that somebody found us on ChatGPT, so maybe something we're doing is working. I know I have to do something. I don't really know what that something is. And so I think for marketers, it's really just keeping your eye on things and just watching this continue to evolve, because I feel like the conversation that we had even a couple of months ago is totally different. And I know that here at Firebrand, our GEO specialists are constantly researching this. They're constantly looking for what are the new best practices, what are some emerging trends, what are ways that we actually can measure this. And spoiler alert, we will unveil a little bit of that in the coming months. But it's just a lot of blind spots and everybody's trying to scramble, and you have to pay attention to it. Now is the time to do something. Even if your GEO strategy changes drastically 6 months from now, you have to do something now, because you don't want to fall behind once there is, hey, here's a set of best practices, or here's something that really, really works. Then everybody's going to do it and you're going to be behind the curve. So you've got to do something. So keep your eye on things, listen to the experts, and see little things that you can do. But if you just ignore it, I think you're just going to wind up even more behind the curve.
Yeah, and clearly this is going to be a sort of board level discussion in the same way as SEO is. Okay, hey, why aren't we ranking for this keyword? What are we doing to raise our awareness in ChatGPT? It's kind of come down. And so I think a lot of it's going to land on some marketer's desk. and they got to have an answer. I think one of the interesting things here is the interplay between AI search and traditional search during the buyer process. Like, you might start out on ChatGPT, and then I think at the early stages, top of funnel, whilst I'm just asking all my sort of dumb questions to sort of get myself up to speed with the topic, like who are the vendors? What are the buying criteria? How are these two things different? Your usual sort of top of funnel type of questions. But then I think as you get into the vendors, people start searching on Google to look around a particular brand. When they're in the middle of the funnel, they're going to go to a more trusted source, and so they can actually end up on websites, and they're going to be looking for reviews, etc. So I do think that it's not a binary. I've gone full Claude and I've moved off Google. I think, in fact, a friend, Adam Singer, just flagged this week a stat from SEMrush around the fact that usage of Google has gone up with regular GPT users. So it's not that AI search is replacing traditional search. It is that AI search is actually triggering more traditional search. And so these are not necessarily replacements of one another. And I think if you're thinking about your SEO, GEO strategy, you do need to think about it through the arc of the buyer behavior. Because here's a stat, like 72% of buyers see AI summaries during their research, but that 90% then click through to sources, and they're checking the validity of that and the hallucination. And then they're going to go onto Google and sort of search a bit more because they want to look at those blue links, because we sort of trust those more than the hallucinations. And so I do think a sophisticated SEO GEO strategy is going to understand that buyers are not just on one channel or another. But it is definitely the case that in tech, your visibility in AI search at the beginning of the journey is vital. And if you're not one of those vendors, we keep saying this stat, 80, 90% of buyers buy from one of the top 3 vendors on their list. If you're not on the list, you're just invisible through the rest of the journey. They're never going to be Googling you if they've never heard about you up front.
Yeah, exactly. AI has really become a gatekeeper to those shortlists. It's not even you getting your message out into the world anymore. It's how AI perceives your value or what you do or what your strengths are. And it's kind of distilling that message to people. You don't have much say over what AI is saying about you. It's kind of like, when you were a kid and you'd play telephone on the playground. And by the time it gets to the end, you're like, that's not even what I was trying to say at all. The message is just totally distorted. And so you've got to remember that even just a couple of years ago, it was your message, it was your branding, it was your tagline, it was those things that people were seeing when they were doing that very early research. And now it's AI kind of summarizing and putting its own spin on what it thinks you are and what you do.
Right. And so just in summary, what can you do and where do those LLMs get their data? Yeah, we're understanding more about this now. They're definitely getting sources from owned content. So what you publish on your site does rank and does get crawled. And that's been the classic SEO play. So don't stop that, right? You got to keep the cadence up on that. But it also is ranking other third-party blogs and sources about your brand. So that could just be other influencer content, but it could also be competitors. We are seeing battle card pages about your brand, like here are the top 10 vendors in this space that your competitor might post. And of course, they're the number one and they're saying pros and cons about your brand. Those things are really ranking quite highly at the moment. I imagine that might change, because obviously it's not exactly independent. That's another big source, other blogs and influencers. Maybe that means you push a little bit harder on your influencer community. The media. So everyone in PR is very excited about this because journalistic sources are highly ranked, and we are seeing some of these LLMs do official deals now with large publications to make sure that things are crawled. At social media, so Reddit particularly, G2, these kind of peer crowds. So again, from an SEO perspective, you wouldn't traditionally be trying to optimize for Reddit. But from a GEO perspective, it's important to understand where your brand is being mentioned there and in what context. I don't see a lot of sort of people diving into Reddit specifically as a brand to try and sort of name drop your brand and your products in relevant subreddits. That is not going to go down well with that community. So I think best practices there are still emergent, but certainly this is a big source too. So there are some things that are like would more classically be sort of off-page SEO that are more important for GEO. And of course, there are some technical things, FAQs on your website, maybe the LLMS.txt file, which is like your robots.txt file, but for LLMs. We have posted some best practices on that to actually how to create it. Some people think, actually, doesn't matter at all. It's a light lift. I would probably do it. Same with schema markdown, right? Do LLM crawlers actually use those? We're still all discovering it, but I would say it's easy again to get this right. So, it could make a difference. And anyway, it's going to improve your SEO. So you should do that. So anyway, the practice of GEO is a little bit different from SEO and it's evolving, but this is a vital part of your discovery as we've just looked at some of the data there. Definitely one to keep watching from a marketing perspective. Like this is happening with buyers, but what can we do about it? Emerging. Exciting though, I think. A good time to sort of learn new practices. Let's just talk, Nicole, a little bit about buyer committees and how buyers make decisions as a sort of second thing that is changing. Just lead us into this one.
Yeah, I don't think buyer committees are anything new. What we are seeing, we've got some data that shows maybe those core decision makers, maybe that group is getting a little bit smaller, but there's still a whole lot of influencers in there. There's a whole lot of cooks that are coming into that kitchen. We're seeing some sites say the total number of stakeholders has climbed to anywhere from 6 to 10 per deal. I've seen sources that say for an enterprise size deal, it could be up to 20 people that have their finger in the pot on this. So you're talking to a lot of people, and those people all do different things. So if you're a marketer, it's not just one marketing track to get this committee on board. It's a track for every persona that could be a part of that committee. You could be talking to the CIO and the CFO or the CMO, people with very, very different job roles and responsibilities and things that they're looking at. If you're talking to the CEO who brings in the CTO, that's two totally different conversations. So you've got to think in terms of multiple marketing tracks because you've got to appease all of those people or try best you can to appease all of those people. If you think, well, we sell a tech product, we're just going to talk to the tech persona. And the CFO comes in and says, I don't understand why we want to spend money on this. I understand why you like the technology, but why is this a good thing to spend money on? And you don't have something that answers that question, that's a large hurdle that you're probably not going to get over. So I think that's the takeaway for marketers in terms of buying committees these days.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that here Vendict said that, the buyer committee is getting a little bit smaller because traditionally, as you say, it's just been getting bigger and bigger and bigger and slower and slower and slower over the last few years. So maybe this is a reflection of actually, look, 3 or 4 people actually make the decision, but there's a lot of other people who are sort of slowing it down or influencing it in some ways. I am seeing startups now think more about, okay, with the advent of AI and the AI model, if you think about ChatGPT, and before that, Splunk, individual users buying the product, adopting it, and then the company upselling the team, a Teams edition, an enterprise edition at that sort of $20, $30 a month per user price point, which has been a SaaS model for a while, but it's really been kicked up a gear with AI. I'm seeing some companies reorient much more towards that for the very reason that these buyer committees, these big enterprise deals are taking so long. They are taking longer. And it means that some startups are like, we love the enterprise deals. I'd love that 6-figure, 7-figure deal, but we can't just wait for those. We have to also do a sort of bottom up, almost PLG-like play, like OpenAI has done as well, because we know we can kind of sell those faster. PLG had a bit of a day and then he's back. But I do think that now I see a few more startups going, okay, maybe this sort of AI selling model is showing the way. and we're seeing more PLG.
Yeah, and for the startups that can't do that, I mean, there's some tech products that just can't do it that way, and we were talking to some sales folks with one of our clients who cannot do that model. And I said, okay, well, what is your typical sales cycle looking like these days? How much content do we need to create? Like, how long do you need to keep somebody engaged? And they said from first contact, it could be 2 months. It could be 12 months, could be 16 months. We just don't know. Like some of these deals are happening so slowly, to your point, Morgan. And I think part of that is the committee. I think part of that is the economy. I think part of that is people want to do more of their due diligence, and that takes a while. They don't want to just take a sales rep's word for it. But, it's a long, tedious process, and you've got to be prepared for that. And that
Yeah.
was part of the reason we were having that conversation is, do you have something useful in your content library to share for that many months? Is your repository that big? What else do you need in the repository that we can give you so that you've got a reason to reach out to somebody instead of just emailing them and saying, "Hey, do you want to book a demo now? What about now? Do you want to go over a contract now?" Like, you don't want to be that guy.
No.
So, it's something to really think about. There's two very different paths that you can take. What you were talking about and on the PLG side, and also just if you're stuck with that long sales cycle, you better be prepared for it. You better have an arsenal of things to keep those people warm because there's a lot that can distract them and pull their attention away in 12 or 16 months.
That's right. Clearly, you're selling to insurance or a bank or the government. They're not going to do a PLG necessarily for a new banking system. And so I think that knocks onto this next point about buyers engaging with sales later. Nearly 2/3 of buyers avoid engaging with sales until they're late in that process. It's up 17 points since last year. That's a Digital Commerce 360 stat. And related buyers want autonomy. 70% of the buyer's journey is now completed without human contact, says Way to Contact Solutions. So to your point about content, they need to find you, and they're going to find you through ChatGPT or Claude or whatever. And then they're going to come to your website and they need to research you. And you've got a large buying committee with different needs, and they're top, middle, and bottom of the funnel. So you're going to need, if you think about that sort of full journey content, you need to think about content for all of those different buyers on your website so that they can educate themselves. And they're going to do this more. They're doing it more. They're engaging you later so that when they actually pop up for the demo or the sale, they're kind of ready to go, and they're going to have some sharp questions for you in the demo because they've already maybe watched a webinar or watched a video, or they're pretty through the process at that point. But it really does mean more content.
It really does. And we've seen a trend pretty much across the board with all of our clients over the last couple of months, looking at new website visitors versus returning website visitors. And across the board, we're seeing those returning website visitors spend about 2 times longer on the site as new visitors are. Now, there's different reasons as to why that could be, but the point is that people are coming back. They're spending quite a bit of time. That shows that you're part of the consideration process. So do you have the things on your website that they're looking for? Because we're seeing that they're willing to put in the time on your website. They're willing to engage. We're seeing that engagement rates from return visitors also tend to be higher than those new visitors. They're out there. They're willing to put in the time and effort. They're willing to engage. They're willing to kind of hand over their information and convert in some way. Do you have what they are looking for? Because if you don't, they're going to move on to the next person on their list that has what they're looking for because they want to do that self-guided research. They want to do that careful due diligence, and they want to be able to report back to their committee and say, hey, all right, I've dotted the I's and crossed the T's, and here's what I've found. And if you can't arm them with that, they're going to move on to someone who can.
That return visitor stat in GA4, that one is becoming more important, isn't it, in the light of this? Number one, are people coming back, or are they just coming to your website from whatever marketing channel that you've got, looking at a few things, then bouncing out and never coming back? If they're not, then that's a problem, right? That's a problem. And so we do need them to be coming back because you're just not engaging them enough, or you've got to try and sort of track them and remarket to them and pull them back in. And so that's really important. What are we seeing maybe in GA4 with AI traffic?
Yeah, what we're seeing, again, pretty much across the board is that the AI traffic is very, very engaged. And that fits with our hypothesis of, well, I'm only going to click on the source link in ChatGPT if it's something that I'm really interested in, or I want to dig into, or I want to confirm, something like that. That's been our hypothesis for a while. And the numbers appear to bear that out
Yeah.
because we're seeing the traffic that lands there is very engaged in terms of time spent on the site and also engagement rate. In some cases, way more than the site as a whole. We've got one client that I think they're spending 3 or 4 times as much time on the site coming in from sites like ChatGPT, and engagement rate is just through the roof. I mean, 10, 15 percentage points higher. That's a massive difference. And it might only be a few hundred visitors a month. It's small right now, but we're seeing the folks that are putting an investment into GEO, we're seeing those numbers continuously climb each month. And so far, it's good traffic. It's the people that we want to show up on the site because they're engaging with it.
Right. And let's be clear, almost all of the source of that is coming from ChatGPT. I know there are a number, Perplexity and Claude and all the others people are using, but the one that is driving the traffic across every client right now is ChatGPT. Yeah, in GEO and LLM metrics, we're looking at how we perform in lots of different models, but the one that you can see consistently driving the traffic to your website is ChatGPT. Here's a Gartner stat. Gartner says that 80% of B2B sales will happen through digital channels. Buyers are increasingly comfortable committing real budget without talking to a sales rep. So, and I think one of them is like up to $1 million they're willing to commit. So, this is mind-boggling that, people will be coming in and going through the full journey and committing to a 7-figure deal without talking to sales. But even if it's a fraction of that, depending on your price point, that means that modern buyers, these aren't your millennial buyers, these are Gen Z buyers now are trying to buy it online in the same way as, a consumer might. So, because that's what they're used to. And so we need as marketers to be catering to that. And so our sort of standard brochure website with a home and a solution and a product and maybe a few customers, it's just not going to be enough. We talked last time about interactive content and how important that kind of stuff is. It's easier to produce. That kind of stuff you're going to need because buyers are trying to get through this process as much as they can without talking to sales.
They are. And something else that you guys should be doing out there is something that we always do. It's a question that I always ask anytime we kick off with a new client is, why do you win deals and why do you lose deals? Because if we can create marketing content that appeals to that, maybe there's an objection that people have and they just can't get over it, and that's why you're losing deals. We either try to combat that objection on the marketing side of the house, or we just say, hey, here's how it is, and you're not the right fit, kind of give that message on the marketing side of the house. Or if we know, hey, these 3 things people love, and that's why we're winning deals, then we're going to create a bunch of marketing content on those 3 value props. And if you're having a world where people are spending $1 million and not even talking to a sales rep, you still need the sales insights that they would be getting from a sales rep. And so that is now incumbent on the marketing side of the house to tackle as well. It's not just sales answering the common questions and combating the objections and the things that you would normally see in a sales battle card. Those are things that marketing has to pay attention to as well, because the sales rep may never get their say.
Right. Let's talk about brand trust. So, as a general rule, as a society, trust in brands, in institutions is going down from the Supreme Court to the media, to the government, to individual politicians, what have you. So, there's a general sort of distrust in large institutions, including organizations and companies, including startups and scale ups. So that's the context. But who do buyers trust? They trust other buyers. They trust other humans who are influencers in their area. 77% of buyers rely on user reviews. So G2 is having Capterra, all those guys are having a real day at the moment. And 54% will want to talk to existing customers, users before committing, which far outweighs what the vendors say about themselves. That's a Digital Commerce 360 stat from 2025. So having a program to get those reviews on G2 or any of those review sites is more important than ever. And even more so, as we just said, because those reviews are getting slurped up into ChatGPT. And you can see that, when you ask, hey, what do people think about this brand? It's those reviews that it's spitting back out.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those examples where our consumer habits are crossing over into the business world, because I won't buy a shirt on Amazon without looking at the review. Like, how does it fit? Are there pictures of people wearing this shirt? It's like a $20 shirt. I mean, if I'm going to invest $1 million in something, I want some validation. And the validation isn't the company being like, oh, we're great. I promise we're great. You'll love it. Like, that's just not enough. You're right. You've got to have that validation out there. Part of that validation is awareness, because if nobody knows who you are, there's no one to validate you. So a lot of startups get so caught up in demand gen, and we've had this conversation that awareness can be a hard sell. But you've got to have awareness for so many reasons. And this is one of those reasons why, is that if no one knows who you are, no one's talking about you, and no one's reviewing you, and there's just nothing about you, that's a hard sell to get somebody to be that first one, to take that first leap with something they know nothing about.
Right, especially in the light of this buying committee, right? Other influencers, hey, I want to buy from this vendor. Wait, I've never heard about that. And instantly, you've got to overcome a higher bar of credibility. Whereas if you've laid the groundwork in terms of your reputation with those buyers or those influencers before they've heard of your brand, they see you around, that bar is a lot lower. Oh yeah, I've heard of those guys. They're good. They're going to wave you through. So that's going to speed the process up. I do want to talk in a future episode about awareness and how do you measure it? Because it's so difficult, or it's expensive if you want to do it. But there are ways to do it. And, this is the classic sort of investing in your brand rather needs to come right front and center, not just harvesting the demand. So we'll talk about that more. But you're dead right. When it comes to this topic of decreasing trust in brands that we see and increasing need for third-party validation from buyers, brand awareness is crucial. And I would also say your influencer campaign here, your analyst campaign, other trusted third parties, clearly a PR program, is going to help sort of just bolster this. It's not just all about, hey, solve this with G2. I wish it were that simple. But yeah, how do I help my prospects just get more comfortable with this? And those are the sort of tactics to do that. All right, our next one. So we've talked a bit about AI. We've talked a bit about changing buyer committees. We've talked a little bit about brand trust. Let's talk about economic pressure, Nicole. What are we seeing here?
Well, we're seeing a lot of the same stuff we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years. The budgets are tight. People are afraid to spend money. It is what it is. It's tough out there from a budgetary perspective right now. We thought maybe coming into 25, maybe some of those budgets would open up a bit. That hasn't happened. Intensify has said 65% of B2B buyers actually say they have smaller budgets this year compared to last year, which I think is actually a big surprise. The pressure is still very much there, and I think it's going to be there for a little while longer. I think AI is the one exception where, hey, maybe we've got the budget because there's a lot of pressure. We've got to go do AI. What do? We got to go buy a solution. But, for a non-AI solution, it's still a tough hill to climb from an economic perspective.
AI is getting the spend, but those projects aren't working, though. I think you found this great stat, or not great, worrying stat,
a worrying stat. No, it was a recent MIT study that said, I think it was 95% of AI pilots are failing. And those are the ones that they're building in-house. So you're spending a lot of money and it's failing in the classic build versus buy debate. If you want to take MIT's word for it, people who need AI are now buying or should be buying, not taking on that expense and the time and all of that goes into building your own solution. So, from an AI perspective, there's definitely buyers out there, but you're still faced with the same things. You've got a buying committee, you've got to have brand awareness. Every company seems to be an AI company right now, or they're leveraging AI in some way. So, getting that trust, getting that awareness is hard. Budgets are still not huge. So you've got to contend with that. So even in the hottest market on the planet, AI, it's still hard.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're in the peak of elevated expectations, I would say, when it comes to AI. And maybe it's just sort of starting to tip over into the sort of downslope and the disillusionment because honestly, there's been a lot of money spent by enterprises and SMBs on sort of these pilots. And as you say, like if 95%, I mean, even if 50% failed, right, that's still very high. And sort of people are tinkering around and seeing some improvements. But like even in marketing, I see some people say, oh, I'm just going to, replace my whole marketing team with AI. Very bold and declare some bias here, but I don't think that's going to work. And they'll be disappointed, being excited about using this and helping it automate and leverage us up without sort of getting out over our skis and sort of expecting too much of it. Yeah, and some people are going to sort of put that marker in the wrong place. So I do think we're going to see, certainly from a PR perspective, more of a sort of backlash against these projects just didn't work in the way that we thought. It doesn't mean it's not valuable. But yeah, AI has been a real hotspot. But, in general, though, spending and sentiment is cooling. The S&P Global has got a stat around the US tech demand indicator has dropped from 55.1 in Q1 to 51.9 in Q2. So whatever that indicator means, it means lower expectations, lower intent to spend, and they're citing policy and economic uncertainty. There's a stat from Forrester here from this year, 35% of B2B marketing leaders and 33%, a lower number of sales leaders, expect budgets to rise by more than 5% in 2025. So only a third think that the budgets are going to rise. And here we are back half of the year, and I don't think we've seen that rise. So budgets are still tight. And so we've talked about, hey, people want more reviews and they've got more caution. That's reflected in that. So if from a marketing perspective, what does that mean? If you think about your product, price, and promotion and place, what can you do to make your product smaller and come in at a lower price with a lower risk to a smaller group and sort of land and then expand? That's the strategy that I see companies starting to play out at the moment. We would love to land the 6-figure, 7-figure deal. We'll be very happy with the $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 deal right now, which we can sell much faster. And so we are repackaging what we do to make that happen. And I would see that probably being a go-to play for a lot of big companies. Even those companies that, like you said, I'm selling to an insurance company. I don't want to spend 18 months doing this. I'm going to sell them something smaller and get in there and get the revenue today.
Right. But even those smaller prices are still sizable amounts of money. So I think from a marketing perspective, you really have to de-risk this at every stage of the funnel. What can you do to show ROI, to show value, to show specific use cases? And it would be really interesting, MIT, if you're listening, I would love to know, out of the 95 AI pilots that failed, was it because they just wanted it to do everything? Did they come in with a specific use case? Did they have a very narrowly focused pilot? Or was it just like, this is the greatest thing ever, it's going to do everything for us, and then it didn't, and it failed? But I think just in general, your marketing funnel has to focus on risk and taking as much risk away as possible. even if you can decrease the price a little bit or change the offering up a little bit to make it a little easier to sell, again, we're selling to people, and if they're not comfortable, they're not going to spend the money, whether it's 10 grand or 100 grand.
Right. I think there's a threshold, like at director level, like $40,000 is often the budget approval for director level. You can put it on a credit card. So I do see some companies like, I'm going to try and sort of come in at that level so that I can avoid the approvals. And I also see a lot of companies asking about, all right, part of what we need to do is make sure we can get it. If we do need to go to the CFO's desk, it's going to need to sort of, why do we need this? Why can't I just get an AI to do it, right? Why do I need this custom thing? So, again, arming buyers with those kind of arguments will be critical. All right. So we've talked a little bit about the changing buyer behavior there. Let's just talk as we wrap here, Nicole, about some of the implications for startup marketers. I mean, clearly, right at the top, you've got to be discoverable where the buyers are. So you've got to have a GEO play. And if you're not there, you are not even going to start the buying journey. And I think that's why there's so much excitement about whatever you want to call it. GEO is what we call it right now, and the emerging best practices in that part. The second thing here is you've got to invest like in sort of trust levers, not just claims. So how do you sort of boost your reviews? How do you get more user validation? PR is really important right now. Earned media, the analysts are still surviving out there. Maybe you can find some independent analysts. They can sort of carry a lot of weight to sort of reinforce your pitch. Number one, be found in AI. Number two, try and boost up those trust sources. What's the number three?
Number three is brand awareness. I mean, that is what is going to keep you alive right now. We're talking about a journey, 70% of it is self-guided. People have to be able to find your brand and to remember your brand. What's the old advertising stat? It takes 7 touches for somebody to even remember who you are. So you've got to be out there. You've got to be across channels. You've got to have messages that are memorable. But it all starts with that brand awareness. So that's a huge thing. And I know the temptation is let's just get leads. But without the awareness, getting those leads is so much harder.
Right. Number four, you got to be ready for these lean budgets. I mean, I think everyone's rigged for this storm at the moment, but buyers are clearly cautious. And we've got to just make sure that we're proving the ROI at every stage. But I think it can also mean, from a broader marketing perspective, repackaging the product, repricing it so that buyers can actually consume it at a lower price point with a lower risk. I see that as another strategy that companies are adopting.
And then one other thing we mentioned, but worth mentioning again, is having a marketing strategy for a variety of personas. You've got to touch multiple people in that committee. It's tempting to say, hey, we've got this one persona that loves us, but there's an entire group of people that need to love you as well. So you need to consider what they need to know and what they need to feel comfortable making that purchase as well. And then finally, one tip that I would say is front load your funnel. Do a lot of educational content. And there's a few reasons for that. One, it satisfies that self-guided journey. Buyers want to go and consume things at their own pace on the certain channels that they follow. If the more educational content you have out there, the easier it is for them to do that. Another benefit of all that educational content is it increases your odds that you will show up in ChatGPT and Perplexity and the like. And early on in the buying journey, we're talking very top of funnel content here. The more of it you have, the more chances you have to show up in AI. And then finally, all of that educational content, it takes the burden off of sales if they're actually getting to talk to somebody. We want sales to be selling. We don't want them to be educating. So the more educated prospects you can hand over to sales, the easier it is to get over that finish line and the shorter your sales cycle is going to be. So I would say front load that funnel, do as much education as you can, and it's going to help you in a variety of ways.
Right. And related to that, don't be afraid to repeat yourself. I think as marketers, we always want to write about something new. And we're assuming almost that all the prospects have read all the content. and you have to repeat yourself so that you are bored with saying the same thing again. And if you're bored, maybe your prospects only just like, oh, maybe this is the message. Like, you need to be hammering those messages over and over again. And I think, from a marketing perspective, we're, often very curious and creative and wanting to say new things and find different angles on the same. You can just repeat yourself in slightly different archetypes, in slightly different ways, of course, but only when you're repeating yourself to an extent where you can't believe it will your prospects actually be, who are distracted and who have other competing demands on their attention, will only then start to penetrate some of your core messages. So I do think that often you'll sort of see, particularly early stage companies, try and sort of cover so much ground. They're like, okay, but just stick to the core things you want people to understand, because they are not going to read every blog post and every asset that you have. So your front loading full funnel journey here, I think, is really important, and it needs to sort of repeat itself as much as possible.
And be repurposed as much as possible. Get it on every channel you can. So exactly.
That's right.
Exactly. Get it out there.
Thank you for that, Nicole. It's really fun. I like diving into some stats about changing buyer behavior. I think as marketers, we really need to sort of understand, we see what we see, but we need to see the big picture a little bit there. So that's why we wanted to sort of dive deep into that. Thank you all for listening to this. If that was useful, please drop us a comment and follow us and like us in all the places that you usually get your podcasts. And we will see you again right here next week.